Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Awesome Wholesaler Experience podcast, where we look into the many facets of the job, the career, and the lifestyle of investment and insurance product wholesaling. I'm your host, the creator of the Awesome Wholesaler Experience, and yours truly, Awesome Mike. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I've done it again. Yet another very special guest on the show today. Let me introduce you to him. He is a TEDx Veteran, an international keynote speaker, multi-published author. But maybe his biggest claim to fame, at least recently, is that Justin Batt is the founder of Daddy Saturday. This is his platform to disrupt fatherlessness by creating intentional fathers who raise good kids that become great adults. Now, Justin's goal for Daddy Saturday is to impact 10 million fathers over the next 10 years and to eliminate fatherlessness. That's a big goal, Justin. Congratulations on that. Now, Justin also spent a dozen years or so working in pharma for both Sanofi and Pfizer, the little company you might have heard of, as a key account manager and a pharmaceutical drug rep, AKA wholesaler. He's one of our brothers, ladies and gentlemen. Going to be able to shed some light on some things that are important to us. Now, you can see he's looking jacked today. Once I stop talking, you'll see him. And he's been recognized for his athletic achievements as an obstacle course race, OCR, athlete. That's a thing nowadays, amazingly. And he competes in Spartan races across the country. Most importantly, he takes his kids along with him, which is pretty cool. Now, when not at work, Justin can be found, as every good father and husband, helping his wife, Heather, to run their bridal enterprise. And I believe that means taking out the garbage, because she's got this thing down on lock. Or spending time with his 4 children and their Bernedoodle, which you named Weekend, which is pretty cool. Welcome to the show, Justin. How are you this morning?
Awesome, Mike. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me. Excited to be on the show.
You know, I got a question I have to ask you before we get going. So everybody's talking about, Social Security is going to run out for our generation and the next generation. Not going to be there. Bro, I have 4 kids. You have 4 kids. Vincent Jackson has 4 kids. The rabbi has 7 kids. Chris Brown's got 3 kids. Everybody's having more kids. So it looks like we're going to save Social Security after all, thanks to us. So appreciate your efforts in that. What do you think about that? Is Social Security going away a myth or what's up?
No, I've read a lot about it, actually, and it's something that's near and dear as I look at not only my 4 children, but as I'm trying to make impact with other fathers. I felt that it would behoove me to be educated on the topic. And I do think there is a risk. If we're going to get into politics already off the bat, I think there's a challenge because it's all about getting reelected. And so for someone to save Social Security, to save Medicare, it's going to take some deep policy reform. And if the primary goal is to get reelected, then that really goes against deep policy reform, because you have to put yourself out there to make that happen. So I do think there's a risk there. And in order to mitigate that risk, what I've done in my own family is I've encouraged my children to become entrepreneurs. All 4 of them have their own businesses. They're starting their own businesses. They're learning about business. And I'm teaching them to be financially independent on their own through good financial principles, practices, and having their own business. So whether it's here or not, I'm trying to mitigate against that risk in my own family in that way.
Dude, I was just making a joke. You got to get all serious on me. That's awesome. That's awesome, by the way, that you're teaching the kids and you're leading by example and probably following your wife's example, which is very cool. And so I wish you much success on that. You brought up getting reelected, and I happen to just kind of like get the vibe. I listen to a lot of your stuff. I take a look at what you're doing. Are you going to run for office someday? Or is that a goal or something you aspire to reach to? And I apologize for putting that in the front of the show. I'll ask you again on the back end, but is that something that am I getting the right vibe there? Or is that something that's crazy?
No, I appreciate the question. And, I would say what's hilarious is when my wife and I first met, we were on our first date, and I asked her if she was going to be president. And I met president of her sorority, and she thought I met president of the United States. And she answered me in the most awkward way. And we still laugh about it to this day because I actually asked her that question. But no, I would say that for me, I feel like I could make impact in the private sector far more than I ever could by being an elected official. Many people over the years have always said, Justin, you should run for office. You should run for office. And maybe something about that would be encouraging in the future. But I have no plans on it today. I think that I've got enough on my plate right now in the private sector, and we'll continue to pave that path.
I don't know if you know this or not, but those are the almost exact words that Donald Trump said for 15 years when he was being asked by Oprah and by Johnny Carson and the old school guys. So watch out, America. We might be talking to a future elected official, or who knows, maybe you'll go the other way and you'll become some kind of a notorious, scandalous operator. Hopefully not.
Never say never.
Yeah, well, you're from the Midwest, so I know you call South Carolina home now. But dude, you grew up. I know right where you grew up because I used to take that road all the way to Defiance, and go right past your high school. And sometimes I'd have to I'd slow down at the yellow blinking light that's in town, because that's all.
That's all we got.
Yeah, you got to watch out for the Amish guys coming across. But tell us about growing up in Middle America and some of the forming moments that you had in your life. And of course, we want to tailor it to, around your father and his impact on you, but also about the community. What was it like growing up in Middle Ohio?
So I had the chance to recently go back and do a Daddy Saturday live event in my hometown. It was the first one that we did in Bryan, Ohio. And it was so good to go back, and it recalled so many of those memories of my formidable youth and just the impact that growing up in small town America had on me. And I was very fortunate. Bryan, Ohio is recognized in and out every other year as one of the best small towns in America. It's what you'd picture. It's got the town square with the four corners and the retail and the big, the big town hall right there in the center of it. And it was a phenomenal place to grow up. Bryan's known for two things: Etch-a-Sketches and Dum Dum Suckers. Two things everyone knows are made in Bryan, Ohio. And growing up there, I can remember the whole town smelling like whatever flavor of Dum Dum they were making that day. And with the 4th of July being out, the Astro Pop Spangler Candy Company that makes the Dum Dums would always put those out, and it was just candy galore all over the town. So great place to grow up. And I can remember my father being very involved in the community, very involved in every aspect of the town. And he was very good about giving time both to myself and my sister, as well as the community. He was constantly engaged, and so was my mother, in activities and boards and helping build baseball stadiums and football fields, and you name it, they were involved in it. And I can say that's one thing that growing up in Middle America, there wasn't much to do in terms of being in a small town. Cornfields were more prevalent than shopping centers. Defiance or Toledo or Fort Wayne, which were about an hour away, Toledo and Fort Wayne were our big areas to go shopping or do anything. So we had to make do with what we had in our hometown. And a lot of that was around athletics and sports. So I played every sport known to man. You could pick up a ball or jump in a pool, and I was doing it. My parents would run me around from sport to sport, and my dad coached most of those through my formidable youth. In fact, he only missed one game my entire career growing up. And that game was the first game that I was a sophomore. I wasn't supposed to start varsity football, and I got in and played varsity that game, and he missed it because he was traveling with Bowling Green to watch them play Alabama at the time. So it was a good trade-off, but he missed a big event. But I can say my dad was always there, and that made a tremendous impact on me. That the hours we spent playing catch in the yard, throwing the ball back and forth, just being father-son was tremendously impactful in my youth. As I got towards the end of my time there in Bryan, I was a senior. It was first day of hitting practice of football. I had some opportunities for scholarships to go play college football. And I tackled, one of the coaches asked me, get out and show everybody how to tackle. So I tackled a guy, and I landed on his shoe right in my lower abdomen, and it shook me to my core. I remember thinking that I bruised my ribs. I got up, got back in line. Trainer checked me out. I continued to scrimmage the rest of the day, and I was falling down in the scrimmage. I was asking my best friend, who I was guarding as a wide receiver, what play we were running, and so he would tell me so I could keep up with him, and I was all out of whack. I went home. Long story short, I had a lacerated kidney, and I was bleeding internally massively. I wanted to go to sleep and take a nap, obviously, because of the blood loss. Had I done that, I would have died. I didn't. Thankfully, Gatorade saved my life. I drank a big bottle of Gatorade, had to go to the bathroom, and not to be too open with your listeners, but I peed blood everywhere. And my mom, being a nurse, calmly said, oh, it's probably just shock. That happens sometimes, keeping me calm. Takes me to the hospital. And I was done a CT scan, saw the bleeding, life flighted to Medical College of Ohio in Toledo, was on bed rest for 7 days in the hospital, 7 days at home. Fortunately, by a miracle, was able to keep my kidney. told I would never play football again. But I was able to come back and play, by the grace of God, 5 games that season, my final 5 games as a senior, which meant so much to me. But Mike, it changed my perspective on life. It was one of those lightning bolt moments that really shifted me. And being a stubborn, bullheaded 17-year-old at the time, I think that was God's way of putting up a bit of a roadblock in my path and saying, I've got something different for you. So I decided not to play football in school, expand my horizons, and that's what took me down south to Clemson. And most people ask me, they say, how did you get from Northwest Ohio to South Carolina to Clemson to go to school? It was something that 12 hours away, not many kids did in my town. And I said it was Southern weather, Southern women, Southern food, and Southern football that drew me south. And it's what keeps me south to this day.
Yeah, I can understand the draw there. So you actually, though, you went to Clemson, but you didn't play sports at Clemson, right? You went there academically, essentially.
I did. I had my cleats in my hand to go walk onto the football team and was ready to go do it. And I just felt that force saying, you're not meant to do this. You're done. I brought you here for a different purpose. And so I decided to do everything else in school. I was very involved in student government, very involved in leadership activities in a fraternity. I did basically everything you could do in school besides play sports. And that set me very well as I began to pursue my career in pharmaceutical sales, leaving school, because I got the academic background, but I also had a tremendous amount of sales and leadership and other components that I had picked up through all the extracurriculars.
So did you meet Heather at school or after school, and that kept you in the South?
So we met while we were at Clemson. I was a junior. She was a sophomore. We dated the last 2 years. We got married a year after she graduated. So I was 2 years out at that point and had looked at the job market. And even as I was a successful student and had done well, it was hard, as it always tends to be when a student's looking for a job. And I think I was looking for the perfect job and found an opportunity with Eli Lilly. So I actually went with Lilly for about 8 months and was really fortunate to go into the pharmaceutical industry straight out of school. I was also hired by Pfizer, had an offer from Pfizer at the same time, but theirs was for a training territory where Lilly was a full-time spot in Asheville, North Carolina. So it took me to Asheville, and that's began my career in pharma sales.
Yeah, that's very cool. A lot of times, even in the wholesaling business, that's what we call it in the investment field, field territory. So it's called the wholesaler. That's why the show is called the Awesome Wholesaler Experience. We don't know how we got here. It's like there's no college course, how to be a pharma drug rep, how to be a wholesaler. You kind of, it's very fortuitous, or it's very dangerous, frankly. And a lot of your work in Daddy Saturday talks about some of the things that a lot of the audience are dealing with. Before we get too far into the book, though, last thing about home, I find nowadays, at least in my experience, the sons are leaving home and they are planting roots with their bride's proximity. So I'm going to assume, is Heather from the Carolinas too, or do you guys both travel to Clemson?
So she was originally from Denver, Colorado, and her father's job took them from Denver to Pittsburgh to just south of Charlotte, North Carolina. So she was in South Carolina during high school. So home was South Carolina for her, and her family was there. When we had the option to go back to Ohio, I had lots of job offers from Ohio. My uncle's in the insurance industry. And in fact, I almost pursued a career in insurance, and many of my family have been in insurance for years. So I know all about wholesaling and the insurance industry. And in fact, held my license for multiple years, and P&C as well as in life and health as well. So I know the industry pretty well, and I had a lot of command to go back to Ohio, but the weather was one of the big deterrents. So yeah, Heather, I think she at the same point was like, I don't want to go to Ohio and be up in the permacloud for 8 months out of the year and sit up there in the gray skies. We want to be down south where we know it's beautiful and we want to raise our family. And we'd always wanted to get to Charleston as well. That was a goal of ours, and we were able to accomplish that.
Yeah, that's well said. I will say, though, I think that there is something about our our world that I think it's a modern American theme to where, we want to sacrifice for our wives and they want to stay closer to the family. Even for myself, I joined the Army at 17, traveled the world, and I ended up marrying a gal that grew up 9 houses away from me. And we still live in Michigan under the permacloud, which, by the way, is parted. we're in that 6 to 8 week, part of the year where it's nice to be up here. But I can totally relate to that. So did you have an entrepreneurial bug in you during college, or was it an awakening after you'd already entered into corporate America? And the reason why I ask you that, Justin, is a lot of the wholesalers that are listening also have that. And some of them nurture that kind of a hybrid mentality of having to represent a company, but also being able to make your own schedule and kind of have some entrepreneurial discretion in that role.
So I think it was my background in sports and just my knowledge of myself, even as I see in some of my three sons today. I was like a caged animal in the classroom. You're sitting at a desk for 6 to 8 hours a day. I wanted to be up moving and talking to people and interacting. And so I feel like I always had that, whether it was entrepreneurship, I at least had that sales bug where I wanted to interact with people, and I knew that was what I was meant to do. I'm a connector by nature, and I recognized that in an early age. I was able to connect ideas, thoughts, and people really well. I've got an incredible memory for people's faces and people's names and can put that together very well. And so a lot of that in my mix, as I just analyzed myself and what I was meant to do, I started to find some of those tendencies. And then in Clemson, they were very encouraging about entrepreneurship. And whether it was joining a corporation in corporate America, you still had to have that entrepreneurial side to things, because essentially, much like the wholesalers, you are running your own business within a business, even if you're not independent, right? So there's always that entrepreneurial aspect to everything you do these days. And I recognized that early on. I was also very fortunate to join a couple groups of friends after my time at Clemson for the summer. And we did a promotional marketing baseball tour called Baseball USA. We built this interactive tailgate experience. We traveled 25,000 miles, 33 states in 2.5 months to major and minor league baseball games. And we had all these corporate sponsors: General Motors, Hewlett-Packard, Chevrolet, Cal Ripken Jr., Louisville Slugger. We're all sponsors. And they gave all this money. Chevy gave us 2 Suburbans. Monaco Coaches gave us a 42-foot bus. They donated all of that for the summer. And all we did is wrap logos around the vehicles and have games and interactive experiences with their logos on it. And so I had this immense experience as an entrepreneur coming straight out of school before I started my full-on career. And I loved that freedom. I loved the risk. I loved the opportunity you got when you were out on your own and you had really nothing but your own ability to sell and make it happen. That inspired me. And so I was fortunate to go in the corporate America route through pharma sales. I encouraged my wife, as she came to me early on and said, what should I do? I'm a teacher. I don't want to teach anymore, to start her own business. And I lived vicariously through her as she started the bridal boutique and her bridal enterprise. And so I had a mix of both, right? I got to be an entrepreneur through my wife, but also and help her build her business and our business. And I got to be in corporate America, which provided a lot of that security and the comfort of having benefits, having a great retirement plan, and early on in our life together, the stability of that side of it as well.
I am going to knight you, Sir Partypreneur. Because that's what you've done. You took the party of a tailgate traveling around and you wrapped it with your entrepreneurial ways, and it sounds like you had a great time and didn't have to go into substantial debt to do it, and really made a venture out of it. I watched and looked into Daddy Saturday, and it's the same thing. You're hanging out with your kids on the weekend. A lot of us do that, but my man, you have turned that into a business, and even more than a business, it's a platform. Mm-hmm. Hopefully you're financially rewarded for it, but if you did it and didn't make a dime, the value that you're bringing is still exponential compared to the time that you're putting into it. And it's not like you're leaving your family to go do an entrepreneurial task. You're a partypreneur. I just coined that phrase, man. That's awesome. We're going to talk in depth about that in a moment. But before we do, I want to ask you about the TEDx talk. And I want to ask you about that experience. Was it worth it? Why did you do it? Would you recommend that everyone tries to do it?
I would. I feel like everyone has an idea worth sharing. And a lot of it's just overcoming the fear of being in that type of a platform. And I'll tell you, and just to be fully transparent with the listeners, I mean, it is a nerve-wracking experience. I had done my share of speaking before that. I consider myself an amateur speaker. I'm not a great speaker, but I'm good. I'm comfortable on stage. I don't really get nervous or the big butterflies before I go up there. But TEDx was a different experience. You're stuck in this little red circle about 3x3. And you literally have 10 to 12 minutes to convey your message, and you have a live audience. It's also being recorded. And the biggest pressure is the fact that for me, I knew that this was going to be the catalyst to launch the platform Daddy Saturday. And that TEDx, if done well, would be one of the core cornerstone components of my platform. And so I had to, there's no redos. You had to nail the live. And I was very fortunate to be able to do that. And I think the other challenging thing was I set myself up for a difficult time because I also had slides with a video in the background. And so the timing and the rhythm of my talk had to be on point with the presentation. And I rehearsed it so many times, Mike. And like anything else, if someone practices something enough, if they want it bad enough, it can happen. So I would say yes, absolutely. Everyone should give a TEDx a talk a shot. And I would say too, the way to do it is to find out the local TEDx's in your area, your region, and then understand what the theme is. So most TEDx's have a theme associated with that event. My theme was resiliency. So I did the resiliency of the American father and talked about fatherlessness. And that was part of the reason why I was chosen, because I had a theme that really aligned well with the overall arching theme. So take your key topic that is an idea we're sharing and then see how you can spin it into whatever the theme is for that TEDx.
Yeah, thank you for those points. It was interesting. And, this is the first time that you and I have talked directly. And after I watched you online and I watched your TEDx several times, I'm relieved that you are much more comfortable in call it the live interaction. You did a great job on the stage, but I was worried that it was a little bit, maybe a little bit too polished. But you're a real guy. Yeah. You really walked the walk, and you're walking the walk. One of the things that I felt is, oh, wait a minute. I mean, Hayden Olivia is, how old is she today? Is she 10 yet?
She's 11.
She's 11. It's funny because you say that like she's old or something. But my point in asking you that is that, Blaine and Mason and Easton, they're all younger. So you talk about Daddy Saturday and fatherlessness and fatherhood and all this. When you actually yourself are still kind of, getting your stride, I wouldn't say you're new at it with an 11-year-old, but there's a lot of things like puberty's coming towards you, coming your way. And then there's the social media aspect of it. We'll talk about your no screen policy, which I also employ in my family. But how are you dealing with your, call it, noviceness in the field, and yet still being brave enough to share your experiences and maybe some of the wisdom that you've curated thus far?
Well, I'll use your term and say I'm a partypreneur. So part of what I'm doing is, we're creating a community and creating a platform. And while certainly if you're the leader of that community or platform, you have to have some sort of expertise or authority in the area. And that's part of what the TEDx and the book and all of the media and content that I'm personally putting out and sharing my experiences. And yeah, I'm a dad who's doing it, right? And I hope that you see that that's authentic and it's organic, and I'm a dad who's biased by action. So I'm simply trying to convey what I've learned in my own life and some of the mistakes that I've made and shortcomings that I've had, especially as I've tried to manage my career and my time with my family, and share that with other dads who I know and who I've now gotten full validation are going through the same things that I'm going through. And I put out a number. Malcolm Gladwell has this 10,000 hour principle. 10,000 hours spent on anything with discipline and dedication makes you an expert in that area. And I talked about it in the TEDx, and it's far beyond that now. I'm well over 13,000 hours with my kids on Saturdays, and combining all of their ages and all that time doesn't make me an expert father. All it does is make me a father who's in there in the game, engaged, and who's had a lot of practice at being a dad and trying to be an intentional and engaged at that. For those fathers who come and say, well, gosh, this is really meant for younger kids, or you don't have older kids yet, how can you, talk to me or share some of those principles? What I would say is intentionality applies to everyone. Intentionality is universal. And those principles, the only thing you have to shift is the perspective, or maybe the way you communicate, or the stage with which your children are in. The principles are universal and can be used regardless of whether you have a pre-nager, a teenager, a young adult, or a toddler in the home. And there's just a slight shift you have to make. And the final thing I'll say about that is that part of this now is it's moving beyond me. And as you're going to start to see in the platform is I did a lot of work creating the platform, building the base and the foundation through myself and through my own family. Now it's not about me. It never has been. It's about reaching fathers. And so I'm bringing other fathers into the community, doing things like we're doing today, talking about fatherhood and bringing others in who can start to share their examples, their stories, and letting all of us as fathers grow and move forward together based upon our shared learnings and shared experience.
That's well said. So you call your platform Daddy Saturday, yet you're constantly talking about fatherhood, fatherlessness. I've read somewhere that anyone can be a father, but it takes someone special to be a daddy. Can you tell us what's the difference between being a father and a daddy?
So when you look at fatherlessness, and it's a term that many people don't understand, and I didn't understand it really until I went into the TEDx and did a bunch of research. And what I discovered is that there's two forms of fatherlessness. There is the lack of a biological father in the home, which is a national epidemic. There's more than 20 million children that don't have a biological father in the home. We also have millions more than that who have a physically present dad, but they have an emotionally absent father. I call it presenteeism, where the father's there, they're just not emotionally engaged. And so I think that's the father that we're now talking about. And that's the difference between being a father and a daddy. Being a father, you can have a child, you can be physically in the home, but if you're not emotionally engaged, if you're not intentional and working to take yourself to the next level as a father, then that's that bridge between being a father and a daddy. A daddy would be a father who, regardless of how much or how good or how well you consider yourself as a father, it's the father who's trying, who's just out there doing their best. And no father's given a manual when they have their kid. I learned more on how to raise my dog Weekend when we got from the breeder than I did at the hospital when I had any of my 4 kids. So none of us are given that manual. But at the same time, we all have a separation between just having a kid and being a father and stepping up and being a daddy, and hopefully a daddy Saturday daddy who's intentional and engaged and changing the next generation through their children.
Yeah, well said. Well said. There is no manual on how to be a father. There are some books that are out there, and there's a nice fatherhood satisfaction assessment that you have put together. And I took that fatherhood assessment. You can actually get it, folks that are listening to the call, on Justin's website. I believe it's just daddysaturday.com. And go on there and you answer some questions. And it kind of gives you a little bit of a reflection as to maybe how satisfying are you as a father, and kind of gives you a little bit of a reflection point. Let's dig into the book a little bit. Now, you've started the book. You founded the platform. Throughout all of your books, or you've written a couple books, I know, and it's funny, I wanted to ask you too, maybe we'll do it for another show, but I know Adam Weddy, and it's interesting the power that having a book actually provides to you. But what is the best piece of advice, Justin, that you can give us on how to be better fathers and to raise good kids that become good adults?
Yeah. So if we're going to boil it down to the bullet point of what really matters most, it's you have to be intentional, and intentionality is the key to everything. When you look at a long-term vision for your kids, good kids becoming great adults, intentionality is what gets you there. And I say that because there are going to be so many moments as a father where you feel like a failure, where it's very hard, where you're not managing your time with your career and your kids well, when you may have an issue with your marriage. I mean, finances, there's so many pressures on fathers today. And at the end of the day, what's going to matter the most is when you add up all of those micro moments that you spent with your kids, where you tried to be intentional, where you organized an activity, even if it didn't go the way that you wanted to. At the end of the day, it's that time you spend together in intentional and engaging fashion that's going to make your kids achieve that long-term vision. I think that's one key piece. The other one is you got to have that long-term vision. So what do you want your kids to be when they grow up? And I'm not saying a doctor, a lawyer, or a wholesaler. I don't mean specifically. I mean, what are the character traits? What is the scenario you see your kids in? Healthy, happy, married, substantial in their career, right? What do you want that to look like? And then back that all the way up, no matter what age they are. Now, how do you get them there? And you get them there through intentionality.
Yeah, that's well said. Thank you for sharing that. Now, do kids need their father to be their friend or to be more of a leader?
So we talk about in the book, and this is a premise that goes straight in the face of most other parental experts. A lot of psychologists talk about, being the hero to your kid, and all dads want to wear that hero T-shirt. And my philosophy is, and what I've found in my own experience, is that you need to make your kid the hero of the story. So if you think about every movie that's ever been made, Donald Miller from StoryBrand talks about this a lot in the business sense, that every movie has the same script. You got the hero, you got the villain, there's some sort of conflict in between. And that from that conflict emerges success or failure for our hero. And there's also a guide. So in Star Wars, Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, and Yoda. And my premise is that we as fathers need to be more like the little green guy and less like Luke Skywalker. We tend to try and position ourselves as the hero of the story. Instead, we need to make our kids the hero of the story. And why this is so important, Mike, is because today, as we look at the millennial generation, they have, by and large, not experienced failure in their youth. And they were prevented that. We've heard of helicopter parenting and snowplow parents and snowflake kids, and you name all those terms that associate with that generation. And now they're entering into adulthood and they've never faced a significant failure. And when they do, they have no coping mechanisms. They don't know where to go and draw to learn from that failure to move forward. So it can be catastrophic at that point. And when you do the opposite, when you position yourself as the guide and you allow your children to experience success or failure on their own, you're there to guide them through that and help them learn from it, either side of it, then they emerge as good kids who become great adults. It's a central piece of that. The other thing it does, and where most people miss this, and I had a hard time with this because I wanted to be like that leader, that dad, that all-encompassing guy that my kids are just like, Dad, you're awesome. Like, awesome, Mike. You know what? My kids already do think I'm awesome. They already do think I'm their hero, and they always will because I'm their dad, because I'm trying hard and because I'm there for them. I don't need to play that role. I need to be their guide. And when you do that, you allow your ego to drop, your pride to fall, and it allows you to bring other men into your kids' lives. And so I am like the least handy guy in the world. I'm not a hunter fisherman, even though I grew up in Northwest Ohio. I did my share of that, but I'm not good at it, especially saltwater fishing. I've got no clue how to fish on the ocean, way different than Lake Erie or pond fishing in Northwest Ohio. And so I've brought literally a guide, a fishing guide in, right? A good friend of mine who has lots of experience saltwater fishing, and he's taking my kids out and they have a blast and he shows them and they learn from that. And I get to sit back and watch my kids learn and grow from another man. And that is so enriching for them in their lives. And guess what it actually does? It truly ends up making me the hero because I'm the one that brought that person into their lives and they're thankful for it as a result. So the answer to that question is make your kids the hero. You as the father be their guide. And in doing so, you'll allow other guides to come into their lives as well.
What's the difference in being a daddy to a son versus being a daddy to your daughter?
Yeah, this is a great question. So a couple things. Intentionality, no difference, right? It's a core principle. It doesn't matter. Now, the way you approach communication, relationship, time invested, discipline, all of those things differ dramatically when it comes to raising girls and raising boys. My boys are wide open. They thrive when they have exercise. They can get their energy out. And therefore, from a communication standpoint, from a discipline standpoint, oftentimes for them, it's got to be much more direct. And I have to still show empathy, still show that I care. But at the same time, they respond better when I'm more firm. With my daughter, it's not the same way. With her, she wants to have an open communication relationship. She may fight it at first, but eventually she gives in. And that communication level between the two of us is what causes us to be able to move forward together as father and daughter. I can't approach her the same way I approach the boys. If I do, she retreats into her shell, goes inside, and she won't communicate. Where the boys, they'll spill their beans if you come down on them. So I think discipline, communication are vastly different. I think the time you spend together is also important. Daddy Saturdays, we don't do activities that are necessarily slanted towards one side or the other. I try to engage all my kids in activities. Now, I got 3 boys. It's far easier with the boys sometimes than it is to plan an activity that also includes Hayden, but we do our best, and I try to get her input or insight. So for families that have a blend of boys and girls, I would say the important thing is always just to make sure you're getting equal viewpoints, equal input from both sides so that you can make sure you're tailoring, whether it's where you go out to eat, what you do as a family activity, where you go on vacation, your Daddy Saturdays, that you're including both sides. And the final thing I'll say is that girls tend to be way more drama, and boys tend to be, it's you feed them and you kick them outside and you make them go play. And, you know, their relationships are far less complicated. And I've seen already as my daughter as 11, she's gone through that phase of life now through puberty. So she's, you know, at a young age, at 11, going through some of those challenges. And I can just see already the drama and some of the challenges in relationships and how much more complicated they tend to make it than it really needs to be. And so even there, again, communication, relationships, it has to be different in the way you approach them and talk to them. And so my teaching, my training, my coaching, my conversations are segmented based on sons versus daughters.
You know, I've read that there are certain things that just need to be taught by a male figure, the father usually, but not always, doesn't always have to be the father. You've even opened up bringing other men into their lives, but it still requires a masculine point of view, like validating manhood. You know, I've read that a woman cannot validate a man being a man. No matter how many times your mother or your girlfriend tells you that you're the man, it doesn't work. You need another man, a member of the tribe, to validate you and say, Justin, way to go. You're the man. You the man, if you want to call it that, you know, slang talk. The same respect is with the females, isn't it? Aren't there some roles that mommies play in the development and teaching these girls how to be women? And aren't there some things that the mom can't do to teach boys how to be men?
You're 100% correct in what you read. And I would agree completely with the premise. And here's why. Because far more is caught than taught. And so if I'm a single mother, and, you know, God bless all the single mothers out there, they have one of the hardest jobs in the world as a single mother, especially to raise boys. And my godson is raised by a single mother. And so I try to play a bit of that role for him in his life. And I watch his mom, and she's a phenomenal mom. But Mike, as you said, at the end of the day, there are certain things that she just cannot portray or do as a female that he needs to see as a male. And when I look at my boys, they sit back and I will find them just sitting there physically, just they're watching me. They're just observing me. It can be how I'm eating my dinner. It can be the way I'm talking to my wife. It can be the way I'm shaving my face in the mirror in the morning, right? They just observe and they see that. And that's what they're catching. They're catching, hey, my dad's shaving his face. Men shave their faces, right? That's what it means to be a man. My wife shaves her legs. Different thing. Some men shave their legs too. That's okay. But they, you get my point. And so what I would say is that it's so important for them to see and pick up. And Mike, you shave your head. Yeah, there you go. It's so important for men to see, or boys to see that man. And so whether there's a man in the home or not, they need to see what it means to be a man. There's certain things that they can only pick up from observing those characteristics in a man. Much like there's certain things my daughter can only pick up by watching and observing and being around my wife, of what it means to be a wife and a mother. And so I think it is important. And that's why when you look at every single statistic that's out there from any source that's ever been written, a husband and a wife in the home together, they have a statistically significant greater outcome in the success of the child, meaning prison time, drug and alcohol abuse, teenage pregnancy. I mean, you name it, depression, anxiety, all of those things are lower in a home that has a husband and a wife. And it's because of what you said. It's because they see what naturally it looks like to be a man or a woman. And then they move into that as they get into their young adulthood and eventually into adulthood.
You know, I echo that sentiment. In fact, I did a report in college on that, and it was on the difference between military people, guys that go into the military, law enforcement officers, and criminals. And they're almost identical in all of their makeup. But the biggest differentiating factor was that the criminals grew up without both parents in the home. Everything else is almost identical. So that's very interesting you say that. And then I'll offer for the single moms that are out there, or even the dads that admit that they probably could, in fact, maybe not admit, maybe embrace the team mentality. You know, my father was an amazing role model as what it meant to be a man, but I was lucky because I had more. My Taekwondo instructor taught me a different angle on what it meant to be a man. My drill instructor, my football coach, all of these guys had different input on what masculinity meant and what it meant to be a man. So I am encouraged. In fact, I'll make this next comment to you, or question, I should say. Justin, aren't we all just brothers, really? I mean, aren't we all sons of the one true Father in heaven? So if you believe in that, which I believe you do based on a little bit of my research, is Daddy Saturday kind of a ministry, your personal ministry to other men?
It 100% is. And yeah, if you read my book or even hear me talk, I mean, I absolutely, as a Christian, I believe that, Jesus Christ has done more for my life, and I would not be the man and the dad that I am today if it weren't for that. And so part of my platform is just to help other men understand what it means to be the type of father that we're all called to be. And yeah, we're all brothers in this. And that's the point of this community, is to help all of us come together and learn from each other, to go forward together as fathers. And like, I can't tell you how many dads I've talked to. In fact, I just had an older father today whose kids are grown and gone say, where was this 30 years ago? Where was this 15 years ago when I was raising my kids? And I think with social media and with technology and with society we have today, we have the ability to come together as brothers, as fathers, and all move forward together. And that's the whole point of what Daddy Saturday is about. It's about that community and changing the next generation and ending fatherlessness. And this isn't Justin's goal. There's no way that I can impact 10 million people. I'm just a small town dad who's trying to do it with my 4 kids and help other fathers to do the same thing. And that's why we put a God-sized goal on this. I recently heard Grant Cardone's got a goal to reach 7 billion people. Somebody brought that up on a podcast I was on recently. And I said, well, man, I might have to change my goal, because if Grant's trying to reach 7 billion people for his goals, I might have to reach 7.5 billion fathers. But we're going to go for 10 million first, and we'll try and step it up to the next level once we get there.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know Grant Cardone and his wife Elena and their kids, and he didn't start at 7 billion, by the way.
That's right.
So when he was your age, he was probably at 10 million, 10,000 maybe, maybe just 10, frankly. But he'll appreciate the nod from you, and as well as maybe the raising your game. He would like that. He would say 10x your goal, and to do that. So I appreciate your efforts. Let's talk about territory sales reps. And these guys, most of them are guys, and excuse me for the gals that are listening. But even the gals, they have this alpha trait. You're out there, you're buttoned up, you're getting after it. You're not the lackadaisical, called laid back kind of mentality. You're competitive, and it's driving. What advice would you give to these, high powered wholesalers that travel a lot? How can they become more intentional and raise better kids?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've been there, right? I mean, that was me several years ago. And I found myself at that precipice where I was working my tail off Monday through Friday, traveling a lot in the field, meeting with customers. Friday night would come. I would be absolutely exhausted. Frankly, waking up Saturday mornings, my wife going to her bridal store, and I physically did not want to engage my kids because I was just exhausted. And if I'm being real, feelings follow behaviors. Behaviors don't follow feelings. And most Saturdays, I didn't feel like engaging my kids, but I started to get up and just do it. So I think that's half of the battle. Just do it. Just put yourself in that place, even though you may not feel like it. Just get your kids together for dinner and have a family dinner on Friday night. Get your kids on Saturday morning and plan an activity ahead of time. Be intentional, and then engage them in that way. I think there's 2 other things that I've learned. One is, I don't know why we do this, but we so often separate our professional and our personal lives. And I think there's so much overlap. And I would encourage anybody, whether they're a field sales rep or in any other position, an entrepreneur, blend your personal and your professional lives as much as possible. Why do we put this firewall up? I think that helps, or actually enhances, some of the tension that we often experience, because we feel like we got to compartmentalize the 2. So what I would say is, calendar everything. Blend your personal and your professional calendars. And when you do that, you may be traveling and you may be coming home, but you schedule your flight at a different time because your kid's got a ball game that night. And now you get in and you make it for the ball game, and it didn't cost you anything but maybe an hour in transit. And it's only because you planned ahead of time. And now you made the ball game, you made it home, and you got the best of both worlds, and you combine those 2. You got a daughter. You plan that daddy-daughter date night that has become so prevalent and so important now in the lives of our daughters. But it's on the calendar, and that meeting does not move unless there's a national emergency or something traumatic happens. That meeting is just as important as any business meeting or sales meeting that you'd have. And you've planned it out in advance, on paper, on purpose, so you know that you'll hold it. And you do it with regularity and consistency. So that's the other thing, is when you calendar everything, create that rhythm that you want for your family. And it doesn't have to be perfect. And there's going to be disruptions, and it's never going to be exactly how you want it to be. But there are those many moments. And so look at what could you do before you drop your kids off for school, or before they leave for the day for school. What can you do around dinner time, around bedtime, that could be something to make it more epic, more substantial, more intentional? I'll give 3 practical things that we found in our family. So in the mornings, I get up really early. I got morning margin. I get up between 4:30 and 5 every day. I do a devotional, prayer time, read my Bible, meditate, and then I exercise, come back in the house, and now I've got myself in check. I've got my stuff done, and now I'm ready to contribute and give to other people, most importantly, my family. And we sit down, I help with breakfast, and we do that every morning. That's one thing that's helped me tremendously. So get up, get it done in the morning before anybody else wakes up, and now you've got yourself cleared for the rest of your day. Keystone habit. The other thing I would say is that in that morning time, it can be like chaos. So if you can plan in advance as much as possible the night before, that's extremely helpful. So set yourself up for success. And then the third thing I would say in the mornings is if you take your kids to school, I just heard this on another podcast, another guy, I love this. Take your kids, instead of just dropping them off in car line or letting them ride the bus, take them. It doesn't have to be every day, once a week maybe, and take a lap around the school building and walk together and just talk. One lap may turn into 2, and I guarantee you, and what this person said to me is, it's amazing how it's kind of like leaving the doctor's office. They don't say what's really wrong until the doctor's getting ready to walk out the door, and all of a sudden now you just spill what's really wrong and the reason for your appointment. Same thing, you get to that last corner coming around and your kids is going to open up, and they may share something with you that's so pivotal that you never would have had before if you didn't create that margin to make that happen. That's mornings. Dinner time, we play a game called Table Topics at dinner. Table Topics for families. It's awesome. It's got questions on the cards. We all go around and answer the questions. It's a great way to have an engaging, interactive dinner. You learn so much about your kids' perspectives on life, on anything. Typically with my boys, bodily functions come out at some point, like they verbally say the words of bodily functions as their answers. It's every time they start laughing, milk comes out of the nose. And it's like that happens so regular now. We're just used to it, but it's a great family moment. We'll have so many memories from that. And then bedtime. Last thing I would say there is no matter how old your kids are, my kids are still young enough that they want stories, especially the boys. As they get older, I could see that starting to lift. Go in and be intentional. Go in and just check on your kids before they go to bed. Say one thing that can go directly to their heart. I put my hands on my kids' hearts, and I ask each of them before they go to bed, I said, what is one thing you need to forgive anybody for? What is something someone needs to forgive you for? What is one thing you want to tell me? And what is one thing you want to tell God? And I just ask that every night. Gives them a chance to express that. I still do it with my daughter, even though she's 11. She still kind of squirms sometimes, like, really, Dad? I do it all the time. And we just had a big moment in our family, Mike, where because of her going through that stage of development in life, she was having a rough time. And I took her for a walk late one night with our dog, and she opened up and said, Dad, you know what? You always check on me. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. And it goes back to those little moments at night. So I give you all those practical advice and tidbits of what we do in our family. And, those have all been because of error, not because I'm like this crazy dad that thinks of all these things. I recognized all my mistakes, and I said, how can I make this intentional? How can I make that intentional? How could I be more intentional here? And it's changed everything. So field sales reps, you're busy. You're out there crushing it. You're killing it. Keep doing that. But then blend your personal and your professional. Look for those areas of margin and figure out where you could be more intentional, even in the routine things of running your family.
Wholesalers, you're welcome, because that was truly a gift. Great words of advice and practical structure that we can employ. I have a couple questions for you, though, about that. It's a very common talking point now: work-life balance, work-life boundaries, work-life blending, work-life harmony. And actually, my guest on this morning, he employs what he calls work-life boundaries. And it kind of goes into contrast to what you just said. However, I think you're both correct. And the way that I see it is that I'm intentional, as you mentioned. I'm present. So if I'm working, that's what I'm doing. However, I prioritize my family's events, and then I set a boundary there so that I will be there for every inning of every game that's possible. Now, as a wholesaler, we have some liberty to do that. As an entrepreneur, you definitely can. But I think as a parent, it's really about prioritizing, isn't it? Isn't it about being intentional and what really matters, and then actually walking the walk and prioritizing, so that even though you're blending the work and the play, the work and the family, you still prioritize the family over the work, because missing one meeting is not as impactful as missing one game. Is that right?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I think that, work-life boundaries, and what I meant by blending the two is just that when you separate them, it causes that separation. And now all of a sudden it's you're choosing between one or the other oftentimes when you separate. So by blending, you're just bringing the two together to say, why do I have to choose? Because look, here's the thing, Mike, we all have, so often we think we have one calling and we feel like our calling is our career. And what I've learned more importantly than anything else through Daddy Saturday is that I have multiple callings. I'm called to be a professional. I'm called to be a father, a husband, a Christian, a friend, right? I have multiple callings in my life, and I honor all those callings, but at different levels. And that's the key. So I've got 4 buckets in my life that I really focus on. I've got my faith, my family, my fitness, and my finances/career. And I put them in that order. And so that order is how I drive my calendar, my decision-making. I mean, that's my why. So to your point, everything that I do revolves around those 4 big buckets. Now, when you do life that way and you are persistent and you are prioritizing, then what that allows you to do is essentially it allows your yes to be your best yes. The hardest promise to keep is the one you don't want to. And I find myself saying yes all the time to things that I regret later on. And then I've got to go back and wish I would have said no, but I'm a person of integrity, so I have to do those things. And sometimes we do that to ourselves as wholesalers, and now we put ourselves in a position where that business time erodes into family time. We say yes to that drink or that after hours meeting or that engagement, right? That we necessarily didn't have to do, but we say yes to it. And all of a sudden now we're regretting it later on. So I think your point is spot on. And that's where that boundaries conversation does make complete sense, is understanding what your buckets are, what your prioritization is. And then you build the boundaries around that so you don't have scope creep where all of a sudden now your career is taking over your family time and your drive for financial success isn't eroding your drive for family success.
Scope creep, isn't that like bad breath, like onions? You had some onions, you got scope creep. That's pretty good for a Midwest guy. You must have learned that at Clemson. That's pretty good. Hey, all seriousness though, let's go back to the fatherlessness issue. A couple of quotes that you meant, which really are they inspire me because of I think my military background and my combatant background. I'm a martial arts kind of a guy. When I played football, I played defensive end. Kind of give you a little perspective. But you said that fatherhood is no longer a playground, it's a battlefield. And then you mentioned that fatherlessness is the single biggest impact on society. Can you tell us more about those two positions?
Yeah, so we'll start with the latter. And because fatherhood is now one of the largest impacts we have on society, if you look at societal ills today, you look at poverty, you look at even diabetes and some of the obesity epidemic, you look at teenage pregnancy, you look at alcohol and drug abuse, you look at incarceration, you trace the roots of what the real issue is. And so much of it comes back to a father wound or the gap of not having a father either physically present or in the home at all. And I'm one of my board members for our foundation is a guy named Ken Canfield. And Ken's the founder of the National Center for Fathering, fathers.com. And Ken has done the most amazing body of empirical research on this topic. And Ken and I spent a lot of time in conversation. And you can take my opinion, which my opinion is that it's the biggest challenge facing our country today, or you can look at the empirical data, which is fact, and the facts show that it's absolutely true. And because of that, that is why I say that fatherhood is no longer a playground, it's a battleground, because we as fathers can no longer just sit back and just loaf our way into fatherhood and expect that our kids are going to turn out as great adults or that our society is going to change. And if we don't step up and begin to engage our kids and be intentional and take this as serious as we take other parts of our life and our career, then our country's in for, it's not going to be a good place, man. And you open with the whole Social Security argument. I think we got far bigger problems in Social Security if we as fathers don't fix this fatherlessness epidemic that's going on.
I don't know if it's going to be 2024 or 2028, but I'll support you, brother. So let's talk about tech. And technology is kind of a double-edged sword here. on one end of it, you can use technology to forward your cause. And you and your team have developed the Alexa skill, which is kind of cool. It kind of helps fathers to be creative and to have the support and the materials needed. And then on the other end, you implemented, as I did, a no screen policy. And I often attribute my no screen policy to the success academically of my kids. And what I did is I said, during the week, there's no screens. Read a book. What has happened to my kids, they play together.
Mm.
They know how to interact with each other. And it's more like the omission of the noise that they would have received with the TV and the screens blaring to them. So I want to talk about that. It's kind of a double-edged sword. How are you using the double-edged sword, and how do you handle that sword as a daddy on Daddy Saturdays and every day?
So as a father, and as I started observing my children, it all started with me. I set the example in the house. So far more, again, is caught than taught. And so if I'm with my kids at dinner or sitting around the couch or just enjoying time together, if I'm on a screen or I'm on my mobile phone, then what example am I setting for them? So I think that's where it starts. It starts with the parents in the household, and we need to set the right example and be engaged during that time. Put our phones down, put our screens away. Because how can you look at your kids and say, put that away, go read a book, and then you're sitting there on your phone yourself, right? So I think the double standard doesn't apply, and you've got to be able to manage that yourself first. Secondly, what we've done with our kids is we have helped them, instead of being consumers, they're to become creators and curators of content. So they help me with Daddy Saturday. They use technology to help process videos for our YouTube feed, or they will work with stuff on my podcast, or they'll help me with other aspects of our digital platform, and they're very involved in that. They help make the YouTube videos clearly. They're now starting businesses. Most of those businesses are online businesses, and they're using social media, but it's to do a business. So they're not just sitting there scrolling aimlessly through TV or through YouTube. They do that. We don't have TV. We have Apple TV, and we have, different types of media that they can consume, and they have their share of that, but it's all regulated around appropriate times. We don't do it during the week. We make sure that they're getting their studies done, and we use it as a reward. Technology now becomes something that's a blessing or a benefit, and it's a reward for doing the right thing. That's the other thing we've done that's worked really well. Because it gets annoying. Like, they had iPads for a while, these Amazon Fires. And like every 5 seconds they would be on them, and I'd hide them someplace, and all of a sudden they'd be sitting there with them. I'm like, how'd you find that? And it's been 5 seconds since you just walked in the door. Why are you on a screen already? So enough was enough. We just had to get rid of it altogether. I've heard of people putting in the Wi-Fi policies. So they'll change their Wi-Fi code, and their kids can't get the Wi-Fi back to use their devices until they get their stuff done. I think that's a great idea. I love that. But let me say this is a really big challenge. And when you look at the research that's just been published, New York Times just published an article talking about the digital divide. And the digital divide showed that higher socioeconomic families are now actually pulling back from the amount of screen time their kids have in a day. And right now, the lower socioeconomic areas, those kids are having enhanced screen time. They're up to 8 hours a day now in lower socioeconomic areas and lower socioeconomic school districts, where it's 5 hours in the higher. And you're starting to see this big divide. And that's only what's being reported. You can imagine when those kids get home outside of school time and both their parents are working and they're coming in a single parent situation, the amount of screen time they're spending is just absurd. We had a child in one of my kids' classes. Their parents let them play Minecraft. They'd serve them their dinner in the kid's bedroom so that they could eat while they were playing their video game. Literally, the kid would stay up until midnight plus playing his game. And the next day at school, he wasn't engaged. He was tired. And I mean, I'll just be really blunt. I think that's a form of child abuse to me. And something's got to change. And the addictive properties, the largest social experiment in the history of our world is going on right now with the use of digital technology. And we've got to be able to, again, be intentional and help our kids use it in appropriate ways. And to your point, there's a lot of benefits of technology. Technology is amazing. It's helping us create the community that we're going to have for Daddy Saturday and that we have for Daddy Saturday. It's the reason why you and I are talking today, and people who want this exact content can get it in the gym or in their car or on their commute or wherever they are. That's incredible for technology. We've got the Alexa skill. We've made it so easy for dads to ask Alexa, based on the weather in their area, what they should do with their kids that Saturday. She'll give them an activity. She'll look at the weather. She'll even put the items they need in their shopping cart, and they can have it shipped to Amazon Prime a day or 2 days later and have it at their doorstep. No excuses, right, to be engaged. We made it really easy. So positive use of technology, but there's also plenty of ways that it's detracting from our kids' growth and development. And we just need to be very intentional as parents to make sure that they're using technology appropriately, as are we as a model.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. You grew up in the Midwest, and I don't know how old exactly you are. I could probably figure it out looking at colleges, but I'm going to say you're hovering around that 30-year-old, early 30s. 39, you said?
38.
38. All right, so here's my gift to you. When somebody asks you how old you are, you simply tell them, let's just say that I'm closer to 40 than I am 30. Closer to 40 than you are to 30. The good news is, Justin, you'll be closer to 40 than you are to 30 for the rest of your life, my man. And you're not lying. But I regress. The reason I ask that, though, is that when we were brought up, to spare the rod was to spoil the child. So I want to know your feelings on this modern day removal of corporal punishment and how that might play into the emasculation of manhood.
That is a great question. So in our household, I'll tell you how we do it. We've got the big D's. So discipline revolves around destructiveness, disobedience, and the big one's disobedience in our household. Let me tell you, that happens quite often. And our kids, if they're destructive, if they're disobedient, then we have a conversation around it. If it's multiple violations, if it's dishonesty, right, they're getting multiple D's that are starting to build up there, then oftentimes when they were younger, we had what was called the paddle spoon. And the paddle spoon was a wooden spoon. The wooden spoon you'd stir your noodles with in the kitchen. And that paddle spoon was our way of saying, okay, like, you've violated multiple D's. If this isn't corrected or you don't apologize, then you're going to get the paddle spoon. And there were times where it was swift, where they just got the paddle spoon immediately because of what they did. And it was, we don't leave welts on their bottom. But we hit them hard enough to know that it's more about the act of mommy or daddy paddling them. I would say the one thing I learned was don't ever hit your kid with the hand that loves them. So that's what the wooden spoon was for. That's what we believe in our household. Our kids are 11, 9, 7, and 5, and we still have the paddle spoon. It is still there. And it is a visual reminder that at those moments when they start to get out of line, we don't swiftly just paddle them anymore. Now we're in the training mode or teaching mode. So we have a conversation. Here's what you did. Do you understand why it was wrong? What do we need to do to correct that? And so much of it is around that conversation. Now, if they start to violate that multiple times, or if one of my kids, this has happened recently with one of the boys, they were blatantly just disobedient and disrespectful to my wife. And you just don't do that. And so one of my boys got the paddle spoon, right? And he completely was back in line, and he knew what he did, and he was remorseful. And it's not like we just paddle them and then send them on their way. We send them to their room afterwards. We calmly walk in. We have a conversation, and that prevents tempers. It prevents saying something wrong that you wouldn't want to say. Because the most important thing is to maintain the relationship, and that's my premise on discipline. So I believe you should train them in the way they should go, and they should not depart from it. And so if they do one of those big D's, that is not training them in the way they should go. We need to teach them how they should behave and act as a productive member of society. And therefore, that's why we use discipline. And the whole point is that we preserve the relationship as a result. Now, I am far from perfect. I am a pretty intense guy. And there have been plenty of moments where I've lost my cool. I've lost my temper. I have responded in a way that I would not want to respond to my kids. And I have worked really hard as a dad and really hard as a man to try and correct that. And there are certain triggers that just set me off with my kids. My oldest son, Blaine, he is just like me. I've heard that the hardest part of parenting is parenting the you out of your child. And I see in Blaine oftentimes some of the things that I used to do as a child that just make me upset about my own self. So I think that's a big key. And then let me also say just two more things. This is a really important topic, and I want your listeners to get this. I've also found that oftentimes in discipline in general, whatever your discipline policy is, I found that sometimes the reason why I get upset is because I place or I expect values of my children that they do not have yet. And what I mean by that is sometimes I expect them to have personal responsibility or accountability or self-control. And frankly, it's my job to teach them that. And as a 5-year-old, Easton, my youngest, there are times where I apply a value set on him that is way beyond his scope as a 5-year-old. And that makes me upset. So then I get upset at him. And then the poor guy's going, what the heck? I didn't even know. Why do you expect that of me? So that's one thing. Don't place values on your kids, one that you don't have yourself. So don't have a temper with your kids and then expect your kids not to have a temper, right? But 2, also place appropriate values based on their age and teach them the types of character values you want them to have. I think it's a key piece and can prevent a lot of those triggers. The other piece is recognize what your triggers are. Some of us are exploders, some of us are imploders. So if you're an exploder like me, you got to be able to keep calm, control your temper, I have a wristband. I snap my wristband, or my wife will tell me, snap your wrist. It's a reminder to calm down. On the other end of that, if you're an imploder, you're going to get bitter and resentful and you're going to hold it back and then it's going to come out at the wrong moment. Make sure you're getting that out there and having those conversations.
You know, they often say that children are mirrors. They're a reflection of ourselves. Also been called God's little spies. What a responsibility we're given when we have our kids. You know, we could go on forever. Let's kind of bring it home though. You've got a ton of great content that's out there and I'm enjoying it. I encourage everyone that's listening to go to YouTube and subscribe to your channel. I encourage them to follow you on the social media platform of their choice, whether that's Facebook or LinkedIn. And one of the recent things you said though is that learning to say no helps to keep your focus on the right things. So when you're saying that, you're talking about you, the dad, saying no to other things like a social life that's not relevant with your current situation. You're not going out to the bars. You're not doing all that kind of stuff. You're saying no to that. But I want to take it one step further with you, Justin. What about telling your kids no? How does that play? Do you tell your kids no to kind of keep them in the you know, in the right and left limits, or do you use a different technique besides telling them no to get them to do the right thing?
So it's such a funny topic because I learned a long time ago that no is one of the most powerful words you can tell your children. And it's not no as in, you know, that the nagging no. It's no as in like, no, we don't do that here, or no, you don't need that now, or it's all around a character development. So delayed gratification, right? Or the whole concept of obedience or respect. So I literally will look at my kids sometimes and I'll say, okay, open your mouth, put your tongue to the top of your roof of your mouth, just like this, and go, no. And they'll laugh and, you know, they're like, okay, Dad, whatever. But the point is that I've gotten so used to telling my kids no, but they understand that when Dad says no, I oftentimes still have to explain myself, but they know that there's a reason why. And oftentimes I'll follow the no with, do you understand why I said no? And many times they'll say, no, I don't. Like, why did you say no? And we'll talk about it. And that's the biggest piece. I think if you just tell your kids no all the time, then it almost makes them want to ask even more and they'll just badger the heck out of you. But if you say no and you give them the rationale, and I was this way as a kid, I would ask, my parents would say no, and I'd be like, why? And they say, because. I said, because is not an answer. And they're like, well, because I'm your parent, because I said so, and you live in our house, right? And that's great, and you can say that. But as your kids get older, they need a little bit more explanation behind the why. And so, yes, say no. Also, one of the biggest challenges we also face as parents today is this whole concept of enablement or entitlement, two big E's that are out there. And so I think if you can say no effectively and help your kids understand why, and that can help prevent some of that enablement or entitlement. And also, one of the other big challenges we also face as fathers is this whole concept of our kids, they just have immediate access to everything that they want. If they want to go watch a movie or a show, this whole concept of delayed gratification is an immense concept. If your kids can grasp this, they'll be in the top 1% of the next generation, just if they have that one concept, because our whole society is being trained. So when you say no to them, sometimes that's the only time they get a no, because they have access to everything they ever wanted typically. And no can be an important and powerful word in their development and growth.
Yeah, that's a very interesting perspective. Thank you for that. One thing that I'll give to the listeners and to you, I was taught actually by one of my company commanders in the military, in the Army. But this is the strategy: is that when you ask for something, so when a child asks you for something, whether it's to go outside or to use their phone or borrow your whatever it is, and you tell them no, they can ask you one more time, or they can ask me one more time. That's how I raise my kids. You can ask me one more time if you add additional information that would allow me to make a better decision. If after you've asked the second time and presented your additional information, I say no, that's it. Because if you ask me again, now you're bothering me. It's not a fortunate thing that you can't understand why I'm saying no, or maybe I'm using my authority in saying no. But that's a way to allow my kids to ask for what they would like. And then if I say no, first off, they can come back and be creative and maybe resolve some of the reasons why I said no to let me make a better decision in their favor. But if I say no twice, that's a wrap. If they ask again, it's Wi-Fi disconnect time, which is the most amazing thing, is to take away that Wi-Fi. It literally is like taking away oxygen, I think. Hey, Justin, we could probably talk all day, all weekend. I'd love to have you on the show sometime in the future and continue to support your work. But let's kind of bring this show home today. I have 2 signature questions that I ask every guest. There is no wrong answer. However, there are some better than others. I'll be interested to hear yours. Here's the first one. If you could pick up the phone and make a call, and on the other end of the line, there is 18-year-old Justin batters up Batt. You had a couple minutes with him. What advice would you give to your 18-year-old self?
Wow, it's a great one. I've thought about this a lot. And, one of the things that I've learned in my life is that I don't have a lot of regrets. I have a moving forward life. I don't look in the rearview too often. I certainly examine past mistakes and so I don't repeat them going forward. So I've thought about this for quite a bit. And my 18-year-old self was embarking on my journey to Clemson. And, looking back, I think the one thing that I would have done differently was understanding that time is your most valuable asset. And as a high schooler going into college and starting your young life and young career, oftentimes we waste time. And I didn't spend time in some of the most fruitful things that I could have. I would have read more. I would have gone and networked more, met more people that were doing things and were at places in life that I wanted to be one day and have learned from them at an earlier age. I would have not spent so much time in the gym just building muscles to build muscles. And I would have spent more time working out towards a goal like Spartan races or training for a marathon or what I do today. Vanity played a role back then because you wanted muscles to attract girls. And it was a worthless goal. Although it did attract a great girl. That's not what she was attracted to me though. And I would also focus on building out my understanding my personal strengths better. I did a lot of personality assessments at a young age, but really understanding what my makeup is and who I am and why I've been given these unique gifts. And then how could I apply those gifts to the lives of others, and even started to begin to do that at a younger age and be more conscious of it. Those would be my advice. It would really be all around what is the use of your time. Time is your most valuable asset. How are you going to apply that? And then the last piece would be from a financial standpoint. I got turned on to Dave Ramsey in my mid-20s. Certainly began to live my life in that perspective, and am much further along in my financial journey today because of that. I wish I would have understood some of those financial principles at 18 and started investing and putting money away in retirement accounts, as I know it would have compounded and I'd put me further along than I am today.
Question number 2, a little more fun, I think. Justin, if you could have any superpower, which one would you choose and what would you do with it?
I love this question. So, my last name is Batt. Batman is all over our house. I am such a huge fan of Bruce Wayne. So I would be Batman. That's the easy answer. And the reason why is because I love the fact that Batman has 2 lives. And he's got the philanthropic. So I would be like Daddy Saturday, Bruce Wayne, running the philanthropy. And then at night, I'd be that vigilante who would be out there saving people and fighting crime and improving our society. So I think you can improve society in two ways, in the day and at night. And that's what Batman certainly does.
Batman, love it. That is, I should have known that you were going to say that, by the way. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Hey, personally, I want to say thanks. Thanks for coming on the show today, but really thanks for the work that you're doing. Thanks for your efforts. I know it's not easy, and the platform that you're putting yourself out there on, and really trying to make a difference, not only for your own family, but also for our community and our country and really the world. So appreciate you doing that. Thanks for coming on the show today. And I can probably speak on behalf of all the people that you've touched in your journey so far, and that you will touch in your journey, and say thank you for that. Appreciate all your hard work, both helping fathers and families to be more intentional. We all appreciate you and your work, and wish you much fortune and success, both now and in the future, Justin. You know, as we say it on the Awesome Wholesaler Experience podcast, it's about the journey, and we do wish you well on yours. I look forward to seeing you again soon. And a huge thank you to everyone for tuning in today. And if you haven't already done so, hit the subscribe button, and you can even join the notification squad by clicking that little bell to make sure that you never miss another episode. We are on a mission this summer to get 1,000 new subscribers. So we're going to need your help, because it's not an easy thing to do. So please subscribe. And if you feel so compelled, share this episode and the show with your colleagues and friends. Thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you for supporting the show. And as always, thanks for being awesome. Good night, everybody.